Welcome to the July 10th, 2014 Murfreesboro City Council meeting, and I want to say a special thank you and great job to our cable staff for our new introduction. I never have felt like a Sports Center anchor, but I do now. And I'm going to handle the prayer and the pledge, if you'll bow your heads. Father, we thank you for this chance that we get to come together tonight, that we've, over the past week, got to celebrate the independence of our country, that we get to have opportunities like tonight where we can come and we can agree to different things and we can disagree on things, but we have that right and we have the ability to be able to live in a free country that we can express our views. And Lord, I pray for the men and women who have served, who have given their lives, and who continue to serve to allow us to be able to have those freedoms that every day as we wake up and we get to move about our community, that we have people who are providing the freedom that we get that we are afforded. Lord, we thank you for what you're doing in this community and what you're going to continue to do in this community. And Lord, we thank you for what you're blessing us with. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, you have your agenda in front of you, and we'll start with our consent agenda. Ms. McGannon, you had, I was looking at the list here, and I'm trying to tell me what we wanted to change on that.
In item D, the section 3009, if there was an editorial oversight, if in the second line the word delivery can be inserted after the word nicotine.
Okay. So we'll make that change and we'll include that in the consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions with anything that's on the consent agenda?
If not, Mayor, I move for adoption of the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, Mr. Gilley, Mr. LaLance, Ms. Tucker, you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Scales-Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. You have the minutes for the June 19th, 2014 regular meeting. If you have any additions or deletions to the minutes, if not, we'd take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. LaLance and Mr. Gilley?
No. Harris.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Harris and Mr. Gilley, I'm sorry. I'm not going to call you Ms. Wright. Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Scales-Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Ms. Scales-Harris, I'm sorry about that.
No problem, Mayor.
All right, number 3 has been taken off of third reading, and you have a letter that's been circulated on that. Item 4 will consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 14-OZ-29, rezoning an area at 448 East Burton Street to Planned Commercial Development PCD District.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Smotherman, Mr. LaLance, Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Scales-Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 14-OZ-30 to rezone an area located along St. Andrews Drive to residential multifamily RM16 district.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. LaLance, Ms. Harris, Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Scales-Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 14-OZ-31 to rezone an area located at 4107 Manson Pike to commercial fringe CF district.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. LaLance, Mr. Gilley, Ms. Tucker.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on third and final reading ordinance 14OZ32, amending a PRD for the Summersby subdivision located along Elam Road to reduce the number of side entry garages.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Smotherman, Mr. LaLance, Ms. Tucker?
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Consider for passage on second, we'll move into second readings. Consider for passage on second reading ordinance 14OZ28 to amend a PRD at Stratford Hall located along Old Lascassas Highway by removing approximately 1.14 acres and zoning as a separate PRD.
Move for passage on second reading.
Second.
Mr. Washington, Mr. LaLance, Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now move into new business. Item 9A, pursuant to Resolution 14OZR-36, adopted by the City Council on June 5, 2014, conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 14.95 acres along Agri-Park Drive from single-family residential 15 RS15 district approximately 1.93 acres, in Highway Commercial CH District approximately 13.02 acres, to residential multifamily 16 RM16 District. Mr. Russell Morris on behalf of RFM Development applicant 2014-413. Notice of said public hearing was published in the June 23, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Ms. Green.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Our first public hearing this evening is for you to consider rezoning property, which is a total of approximately 14.9 acres. This property is located along the western side of Agri-Park Drive and east of Gresham Park Lane. You can see the property identified in the orange on the map before you. This property has frontage on both Gresham Lane and Agri-Park Drive. The property is currently zoned with two zoning classifications. The majority of the property, which is 13.02 acres, is zoned CH, and that's Commercial Highway District. The remainder of the property is zoned RS15, and that's Single Family Residential District. The property was zoned CH when it was annexed, soon after it was annexed in 1991, and then the property that is zoned, the portion of the property that is zoned RS15 was zoned such when it was annexed in 1996. This is all one tract of land that happens to have two different zoning classifications upon it. The developer and applicant is requesting that you consider changing the entire the zoning for the entire property to RM16, and that's multifamily residential district, and it would allow a density of 16 dwelling units per acre. The property is located just south of the Lane Agri-Park site, which is zoned PCD, or Planned Commercial District. It's located north of properties that are zoned CH, and that's Commercial Highway District, directly north of the mulch company, which is a facility where you can buy mulch, and I believe the owner also grinds mulch in that facility. And then the properties that are fronting along Gresham Lane are zoned RS15, and some are developed with single-family homes. This property does have a cell tower located upon it, and that is expected to remain with any development of the property. The applicants have submitted a site plan for this property, which shows the development of 240 dwelling units with a mixture of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. They're also showing, in a revised version of the site plan, an additional landscape buffer located between some of the single-family home to the west to serve as an additional buffer. We're still working with them to make sure that plan's workable, and of course we're working with the Urban Environmental Department to make sure that no grading of the site will disturb the existing landscaping, which serves as a very good buffer and screen to the property. And so that's something that I'm currently working with the developers on. The Planning Commission did consider this matter on May 7th. However, at that meeting, they decided to defer action to allow the applicant to have more conversation with the property owner to the south who owns the mulch company, and I believe that you should have before you some letters from the owner of the mulch company. After that May 7th meeting, at the May 21st daytime meeting, the Planning Commission reconsidered the matter, and at that meeting are recommending that this be unanimously approved. There were 5 members present on May 21st. Mr. Clyde Roundtree and Russ Morris are here this evening, and they'd like to come to lectern and give a brief presentation about the project. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing. You should conduct a public hearing prior to making your decision regarding this zoning change request.
My name is Russ Morris, here on behalf of RFM Development Company. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I would like to say that we contracted to purchase this property through Mr. Harney, did some initial due diligence and independent market study on our proposed development. Subsequently, through our lenders, hired a third-party company to do a complete market study to determine that this is a viable project in terms of the need in the community for additional residential units. And we got very favorable results from those market studies that we purchased and had done. And we're really excited about working through this process with the city. We've worked very hard to try to work with our adjoining property owners to come up with a plan that's acceptable. And Clyde has a more thorough presentation and he will make for you tonight. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Clyde Roundtree. I'm planner with Huddleston Steel Engineering. Mayor, council members, we have gone through a thorough process of trying to make sure we did due diligence with the surrounding neighbors. And there are a few here on that behalf. Mr. Emanuel's here to talk about the mulch company and his perspective. So we'd like to have the public hearing if we could, and at the end I'd love to add any comments to answer any questions that may arise based on public comment. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions before we open the public hearing? All right, the rules of the public hearing are the same that we just went over. I'll go ahead and read those again. Please come to the podium, state your name and address. Ask that you speak no more than 3 minutes unless you're representing a group. Please address all comments to the City Council. And at the end of the hearing, we'll keep notes, but we'll try to address all comments. And each person will be allowed to speak only one time. All right, we'll now open the public hearing.
Good evening. I'm Tony Emanuel. I'm the owner of the mulch company, the next door property to this proposed development. I have submitted letters to you, and I just want to add that if the tables were turned in this matter and there was a 240 family residential development and I decided I had a very good market study that a mulch company would do very well right next door to them, and the land was currently zoned residential, would you rezone that land to commercial highway for me? Because I have a very good business case for it. If you stand on the front of my property or the subject property, you can see and hear I-24. If you look the other direction, you can see Highway 96. If you allow this kind of zoning with all the vacant property along Agri Park Drive, currently zoned CH, if you grant this, how could you say no to any other developer who wanted to put multifamily on this corridor, which you've had zoned for a long time as CH, and I believe correctly so? If you were to dump substantial numbers of drivers onto the Regression Lane and Highway 96 entrances to this subdivision, I believe you will have a traffic nightmare down the road. I am asking that you regard this in a general sense. I have no problem with the developer. They allowed me to see their preliminary site plans, and when I had some serious concerns, They made a good faith effort to address them. They moved roads on their property. They changed the aspect of some buildings. It still doesn't cover the fact that you're going to put a 3-story building and 240 families right next to a CH-zoned company that's been there since 2-3 years ago. I purchased this place on the basis that I was a CH-zoned company and I would be surrounded by CH-zoned other businesses. I would never intentionally place my mulch company next door to 240 families. Never. And I ask you please to consider this. There's no great overriding reason that this is incorrectly zoned and that it should be zoned residential. And I don't dispute that there's a very good business case to be made for putting homes there. It's just that you can hear the highway and you can see Highway 96. I ask you, please, if you do grant this, and I certainly am not in possession of all the facts, you may have perfectly good reasons to rezone this, would you please grant special discretion to your planning staff to make sure that their development is compatible with mine? For example, one of the issues was that they had 3-story buildings almost on my property line looking over into the mulch company. And I asked them to please change that, and they did change the aspect of the buildings, but not allaying all my concerns. And I don't expect to be telling them what to do with their property if you do rezone it, but I ask that you please grant Mr. Adelot and his department additional discretion to act as a mediator between the two of us, that I don't just get treated as the next door neighbor and have no say in this process of their site plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Emanuel. Anyone else who'd like to speak? Okay. I'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 14-OZ36 to rezone an area along Agri Park Drive to residential multifamily 16 RM16 district. I think Mr. Emanuel had more of a comment than necessarily questions, but council members, if you have any questions for staff.
Actually, Mayor, I would like to ask Mr. Roundtree to come back up and address some of Mr. Emanuel's concerns, because we discussed this at the Planning Commission, and some of us had misgivings with it. Then, just because of the point that he makes, the folks that move into your development are going to look out and see and smell a mulching facility, and he's worried about having to deal with that after this is done. What have y'all done to try to address that concern?
Mr. Gilley, we had a chance to meet with Mr. Emanuel at our office at least twice. The first generation, he brought a point that was really valid. We had the apartments were basically up against the property line. And his first request was there a way to move those apartments so they're not directly on the property line. There is a really nice existing buffer line that he would like to respect, we would like to respect, and those apartments could threaten that buffer line just in terms of the sheer impact of what they would do against that line. So we recirculated a road. So up against the property line is now a road as well as parking. So the buildings which were, basically tied up to the property line are now 60 feet off, and there's a driveway, parking between those buildings. Plus, as he mentioned, the aspect of the buildings, they were perpendicular, parallel to the property line. So where the mulch company is, those buildings were basically, you'd look right there and they were parallel. So we canted two buildings that were his primary concern to make sure that the focal point from those buildings were basically deterred from his heaviest impact area. He has a personal area where the majority of his bigger work is done, and we've made concessions to make sure that the majority of the sight lines from the apartments are not parallel to that situation, but also kind of looking away from it. He has his company is he keeps it immaculate. It's a very well-appointed business. So I think there's been a lot of give and take to make sure we did all we could. Our client has been very willing to to make sure we did what we could do, to make sure that we met as many of his needs as possible. His biggest desire was for us to totally camp the buildings in such a way that only the smallest portion of the building was basically inside of his property, but we weren't able to get that much movement based on some of the existing site conditions. So we did, the buildings went from being on the property line, parallel to the property line, to being 90 feet off the property line and basically put at a 45-degree angle. So there's no longer that just sheer wall of apartments that he's going to have to wrestle with.
Okay.
Mr. Aylott, I have a question, probably a philosophical question and then also a strategic plan question. When we're looking at a site like this and we're saying 240 units, and I'm saying something that council members have heard me say, but you go down Medical Center Parkway, you've got 450 units in the apartment complex that I think several of us get phone calls about. You go across 24 and you've got zone property for multifamily down Manson Pike and Fortress. Multifamily around Overall Creek, multifamily. If you go down the road here on St. Andrews Drive, a quarter of St. Andrews is mainly multifamily. Is the strategic plan going to look and say we're going to look at areas and we have enough multifamily in that area, it's saturated, and it's causing service delivery and traffic issues? Is that something the strategic plan will look at?
I believe it will.
Is that something you have a concern here with? Especially with Gresham Lane?
With Gresham Lane, I'm very concerned about commercial or increased traffic of any kind on Gresham Lane. Gresham Lane is a substandard street. We have an expectation, we have discussed it with the applicants, and their preliminary site plans indicate that they will only have emergency access that will be gated to Gresham Lane. Gresham Lane is simply substandard. And I have given the signal to virtually everybody that comes to visit me on any kind of development that we want to curtail heavy development, heavy traffic development from having access to Gresham Lane until it's changed. Primary access will come from Agri Park Drive. Agri Park Drive is a 3-lane street. Agri Park Drive has quite a bit of capacity. I'm not concerned about the multifamily traffic on Agri Park Drive quite simply because we had anticipated heavy traffic because it is already zoned commercial highway, a classification that would allow as much or more traffic than would be generated by the development that's proposed. So I'm not worried about Agri Park Drive. I think it has the capacity to handle this or other development and other development that will take place. I think part of what the comprehensive plan is going to do is take a look at development capability of the community, not just here, but throughout. One of our policies that we have had that came a little bit from our old comprehensive plan was to look at a transition of land uses between heavy uses and light uses. The Agri Park itself is what I consider to be a light use. It has commercial highway directly up against it today. Perhaps this is allowing for a transition with a more of a what I'd consider actually by today's standards, RM16 is more of a medium density multifamily type zone. It's not by any means a high density multifamily zone. So that's sort of a philosophical answer, and that's also a little bit of a answer about the comprehensive plan. My expectations. Now, Mr. Lyons has also had discussions quite a bit on the scope of services that you're all going to look at tonight, and maybe be able to answer some questions about his expectations of what the plan will be doing.
Can I ask you a question too?
Sure.
Or you want to address that first? Go ahead.
The comprehensive plan really is going to set forth that blueprint for the next 20 years, and looking at land use, infrastructure, and capacities of our city services is going to be integral to that plan.
Did you have anything?
Sure. No, go ahead.
So as we look at the property that's in question here, the road that goes out to Gresham, there's going to be a gate there. To the point that he was getting at, I would say, is there any real reason, or is there any negative or positive to continuing this all the way out there to cover up the RS-15 portion of this? I mean, is there any magic to to needing that, or does that, if it's just an exit, is that all that's going to be as a road? I guess maybe we ought to look at the plans, but is that all that's going to be out to Gresham Lane?
Well, actually, that will be part of the amenity. One of the things, I kind of laugh because it's something that's a little bit new to me, but they're showing a orchard to be constructed in that area. That's to be part of the of grounds and a landscaping package of the multifamily complex. I think they're going to be calling it something like Orchard Park is what the development name will be. But we hear about these urban farms. This is going to be a little bit of a orchard. They're going to look at planting some trees in that area. What you see on the map is much wider than the road itself. There's also a cell tower on the property, and there is a access drive to that cell tower today. It will be upgraded to be an emergency access. The cell tower will still have their unrestricted access. The gate will be between it and the multifamily. From a need standpoint, I think in looking at the density calculations, they may need that area to get the numbers that they're trying to achieve for the development. They're trying to hit a number upward, somewhere around 240 units. And I think from a density calculation, they may need that area. From a land development grading change, it's going to be basically a landscaped area, and it will be gated so that there will be no vehicular access from this apartment complex, but still allowing access to the cell tower to keep it in operation.
Okay. Any other questions? Right.
The issues that were brought up by the Planning Commission that I read in the notes, I think it was by Mr. Halliburton, if I remember right. I'm just kind of going from memory here. I can't get it pulled up on my notes here. But have all of those been addressed? Is that, or have they not? Is the buffer, I think, was one of them. Here, I'm going to try to find it.
It's in the minutes.
122.
It's in the minutes of the packet which I gave you, and it was in the motion that Mr. Halliburton made, and the site plan, which we just got this week, does show those elements being implemented, although the zoning doesn't mandate that. They're voluntarily complying with all three or four of those requirements.
I guess I was asking the question because I heard you say you're still working on some of these things.
Well, we have plats and plan submittals once a month, and we just had our submittals Monday. My job is to coordinate the review and review those plans and make sure they comply with our standards. So I got a little over 30 plans this week, so I've looked at all of them. I've spent a little bit more time on this one, but I'll prepare my comments and send them out Wednesday. But I did look for those specific elements because I'm also involved in the zoning, and I knew that was a concern of the Planning Commission, and they voluntarily had those elements in there. We had some concerns about the buffer and how it would be implemented. So one of my comments back to Clyde, who worked on the landscape plan, is your grading plan seems to be in conflict with your tree preservation plan because you can't put 3 or 4 feet of fill around existing trees and expect them to live. Those are the types of things that I look at. So although they're showing an area, my technical role will be how to make that happen.
Is this one of those pieces where we say we'll assume that they'll get that figured out? I mean, is that they feel like that's?
But I think normally that on situations like this, that if it's past Planning Commission, it's been subject to staff comments, and the staff comments, I assume that would be one of the things that you have to make sure is taken care of.
So this item will go to the Planning Commission on the 23rd of this month. So I'm going to give them comments next Wednesday. They're going to revise them and get them back to me before Planning Commission. And if it hasn't been done at the meeting, I advise Planning Commission that they haven't met the standards. and they can deny it, or they can conditionally approve it and say, you've got to do what Mrs. Green is talking about, and it's in writing. This is pretty routine for me and our staff.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Ms. Rhines, I think we're all really excited for the strategic plan to start. If we could get it done by next week, that would be great.
The whole plan.
Everything. And that's the part where I think, it's tough for an elected body to get up and say there's too much of this, too much of that. But I think we rely on our professionals to be able to look at an area and say, okay, you've got too much of this use. And that's where we are sort of at a disadvantage, because we're trying to make decisions on a person's property rights and then their zoning when, I think I'm looking forward to having that information.
Does our process, the question I guess I would have, does our process as it goes back through the Planning Commission and her process of this, does that basically do what Mr. Emanuel was asking? I mean, it sounded like he was wanting to make sure that the planning department was able to sort of mediate and guide this a little bit to make sure he was protected in this deal as much as possible. And I understand his point. His point is very well taken. I do think there is a difference if you come in commercial highway behind residential. I think it's different that if you come in residential behind commercial highway. My personal opinion is there's a little difference there, but I still understand the point, and certainly would dislike the idea that he was getting a bunch of complaints, right away as soon as these people move in there, and he's sitting there going, you should have thought about that before you signed up. So I'd like to make sure it's addressed, and I think if our staff and our situation, our typical process is going to address that, I'd be comfortable with that. I just want to make sure that's kind of what's happening. That's why I'm asking the question. So thank you guys.
Mr. Adlott, when I got on the Planning Commission many years ago, explained to me that the Planning Commission deals with all the details and the things exactly what you're talking about, that when we don't see a site plan. So that's rely on Councilman Gilley and Vice Mayor Young on the Planning Commission.
There's no more comments. I'll move for passage. Is that appropriate timing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I made the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Mr. LaLance and Mr. Gilley. Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Gilsingers?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Okay, we'll move to item 15. Pursuant to Resolution 1408 R37, adopted by the City Council on June 5, 2014, conduct a public hearing to consider annexing 156.6 acres along Veterans Parkway and to consider a proposed plan of services for the area. Ms. Kathy Wright, executor of Bess Hartman Estate, applicant 2014-504. Notice of said public hearing was published in the June 23, 2014 issue of a local newspaper.
Mayor McFarland and audience, due to my affiliation with this project, I will neither participate and I will abstain from voting.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Ms. Green, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Our next public hearing this evening is for you to consider annexing property which totals approximately 156.6 acres. This property is owned by Ms. Kathy Wright, this application is being made by Ms. Kathy Wright, who's executor of Bess Hartman Estate. The petition for annexation has been made by the property owner, and there is a representative of the property owner, Mr. Matt Murphy, who's in the audience, who is available to answer any questions you may have regarding the annexation, but doesn't have a presentation prepared for you. The buyers of this property are Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation, and there's a companion zoning change request that will be the subject of the next public hearing. However, this public hearing is strictly to consider the annexation of this property, which also includes right-of-way. It includes approximately 2,000 and 70 feet of Veterans Parkway right-of-way. And you can see the property that is shaded orange and blue is the subject area, which totals the 156.6 acres. The area that's shaded yellow on the map shows the current city limits, and you can see that this property is contiguous with current city limits on both its northern and southern property lines. Properties to the north are part of developed single-family subdivision, and properties to the south are also part of a developed single-family subdivision, which is zoned planned development. This property does back up to Overall Creek along its eastern property line. You can see that as the blue line on the map. And just across the creek are more single-family homes. And Veterans Parkway, of course, is a street which is still somewhat new in our community. It's been it's been constructed, and it leads to Interstate 840. This property is contiguous with current city limits. It's located within Murfreesboro's urban growth boundary. The owners have requested this annexation, and you have a plan of services before you which outlines the services that the city will be able to provide and a time frame when we can provide those services. This property will be relatively easy to annex. All services will be available upon the annexation becoming effective, and many of the services like sewer and water will be extended to the property as the property develops by the developer, who will be, of course, at this time, Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation. The night of the public hearing, there were 6 members present. All 6 members did recommend that this property be annexed. I mentioned Mr. Matt Murphy is here this evening representing the owner. If you have any questions, there are representatives of Middle Tennessee Electric in the audience. However, they'd like to speak regarding the zoning of the property. Of course, if you have questions for them at this time, they'll gladly answer them. You should conduct a public hearing and then make your recommendation regarding this annexation. And staff, of course, is available for questions.
Okay. Do you have any questions regarding the annexation? Thank you, Ms. Green. Okay, I'll open the public hearing for the annexation. Those wishing to come and speak, please come to the podium. Okay, anyone wishing to speak about the annexation? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for passage on first reading ordinance 14-OA37 to annex an area along Veterans Parkway and to adopt for same a plan of services. Ms. Kathy Wright, executor of the Best Hartman Estate, applicant 2014-504.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Mr. Gilly, Mr. LaLance. Ms. Tucker?
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Abstain.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Pursuant to Resolution 14-OZ-R38 adopted by the City Council on June 5, 2014, conduct a public hearing to consider zoning approximately 149 acres along Veterans Parkway as planned commercial development, PCD district, simultaneous with annexation. Mr. Chris Jones, on behalf of Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation, applicant 2014-418. Notice of said public hearing was published in the June 23, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Screen.
Thank you. This next item, as I mentioned, is a companion zoning change request to the previous annexation request, which you just considered. You have before you a request to rezone approximately 149 acres to PCD, Planned Commercial District, simultaneous with its annexation. Currently, the property is used as a single-family home and for agricultural purposes in the county, and without a zoning change request would come into the city with a default RS-15 zone. However, the applicants who do have a contract to purchase the property are requesting that you consider changing that to PCD. The properties to the north are zoned RS-15, Single-Family Residential District, and that's part of the Berkshire subdivision. Properties to the south are zoned PRD, Planned Residential District, are the developing Cloister subdivision. The properties to the east are zoned RS-12 and are also developed single-family subdivisions. Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation have provided you with a program book, which you should have in digital form and a paper copy, which specifies their plan for development for this property. What they provided to you is a long-range plan. This isn't something that they expect to implement within the next year. I would say it's easily a 10-year plan and maybe even 15-year plan. Therefore, they've divided it into phases, and you can see what portions of development they wish to pursue first and those which will be more long-range. This property is located within the Blackman Land Use Study area, and I've got an illustration from the Blackman Land Use Study in your packet for you to view. That study recommends this area be used as public, semi-public area. At the time the Blackman Land Use Study was developed, it was contemplated that this area could be used as a school or other large campus. The proposed plan is not inconsistent with the Blackman Land Use Plan in that Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation is in many respects an institutional type use, and the proposed plan includes very significant amounts of open space. Included with the agenda materials should be a description of the public institutional use as well. There's been a considerable amount of public outreach with specifically the Berkshire subdivision to the north. I know the applicants have met on several occasions as well as staff to see what can be done to help mitigate the impact of having this user located next to some single-family homes. And there have been various versions of buffers presented throughout time. This request was recommended to be approved on June 4th. The applicants wished to make some more changes to the buffer and brought that back to the Planning Commission on June 18th. Both requests are recommended to you to be approved unanimously. There are 6 members present that evening. I'd like to invite Mr. Clyde Roundtree and the team from Middle Tennessee Electric up to the lectern to go through the specifics of the plan. There have been quite a few people who've worked on this, and I think that they've gotten it in much better shape than they initially started, and they'll go through the details of the buffer. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Green.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I'm Chris Jones, the president of Middle Tennessee Electric. It's my honor to be before you tonight to represent Middle Tennessee Electric, our members, our member-elected board of directors, our employees, and our staff. Having been through the Planning Commission process, I plan to be brief in my remarks, but allow me to say first and foremost, I'm here to answer any questions that I can and to be of any assistance that I can. With me tonight are members of our board of directors, our Rutherford County delegation, in fact, Mr. Will Jordan, Mr. David Lee, Mr. Mike Woods. Also with me, our corporate counsel, Mr. Jim Cope, Mr. Lyle Lynch from Johnson & Bailey Architects, and Mr. Roundtree, who'll come up in just a moment and speak to some of the clarifications that were made in follow-up to the Planning Commission approval. Second, let me say that we're excited about this long-range prospect of making our headquarters home, not just in Rutherford County, but in Murfreesboro for the long term. Middle Tennessee Electric has had its headquarters in Murfreesboro for about 8 decades now. And what we would seek to do through this proposal is make it our home for the next 8 decades. Again, this is a long-term plan, and what we're looking to do is to consolidate our district operations office here in Murfreesboro with our corporate operations office into a headquarters campus, as we've discussed before. And we intend to construct this headquarters campus to build it in such a way as to make the members of Middle Tennessee Electric proud, to make the community that we're seeking to move into proud, and to make the city proud. And so we seek to be a good corporate citizen like we have for the last 77 years, and we pledge to be a good member to the community we seek to move into. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Roundtree to come up and speak to some of those clarifications, and again, happy to answer any questions that we can.
Hi, I'm Clyde Roundtree with Huddleston Steel Engineering. I would just like to first off thank Middle Tennessee Electric Management Corporation for allowing us to be part of such a significant project. It's been a joy, really, to work with them as a team, to collaborate with their design team, with Mr. Lynch, and to come up with a plan that we feel like will serve their corporation well, will serve the community well. I'd also like to thank the city staff. This is another project that required a lot of interaction with Mr. Aylott and Mrs. Green, and it's been a real joy to watch the process unfold. The biggest issue that came up out of the process was making sure the surrounding neighbors would feel like this was a compatible neighbor. And as was mentioned by Margaret Ann, it is a campus-style kind of development, so there's a lot of green space allocated. That was Middle Tennessee Electric's desire, to make sure it had that kind of campus appeal. The primary issue we ran into was the buffer, primarily along the Berkshire neighborhood. So we spent a lot of time, had community meetings with them, met with their community leadership, their neighborhood board of directors and had a chance to kind of figure out a plan that would suffice. And really, with Mr. Alot's primary influence on helping us kind of navigate through this, we came up with the idea of a landscape preservation easement, which will be a 30-foot area along the Berkshire property line. And within that easement, the current ownership of the property will have some flexibility. We're not going to develop right along the property line. Middle Tennessee will still own that property. However, we're going to pull basically our perceived property line in 30 feet. That's where our buffer is going to begin. We eventually will fence it once we have ownership of the property. And ultimately, the goal is to create somewhat of a natural-looking buffer as if it never happened. And that would be appeasing the neighborhood, as well as allowing us to keep the concept consistent with what Middle Tennessee Electric would like to create. I have met with Kane Adams specifically on the type of vegetation that would be used for the buffer, and we went through some generations on that, eliminating some trees, adding some trees. So it's been a very interactive process with the city staff. I feel like we've come up with a really strong product that can be used and leveraged for a long time by Middle Tennessee Electric. I feel like the neighbors have represented their concerns. I think we've met their concerns. So with that in mind, if you have any questions of me, I'd be glad to answer them. If there's any public input that we need a response to, be glad to respond to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roundtree. Do you have any questions for the applicant or staff before we open the public hearing? Yes, sir, Mr. Smotherman.
Mayor, one question. Ms. Green, just for clarification's sake, so I understand exactly what we're doing, the last resolution was 156 acres. This resolution says 149 acres, and the executive summary says 150 acres. How come these numbers don't match?
I can speak to the two that we provided. Executive summary is not something that I wrote, but the 156 acres includes the right-of-way that was annexed.
Okay.
And then this 149 acres does not include the right-of-way. Typically, we don't zone rights-of-way, although there would be a color on the maps.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good question. Ms. McGannon is proud. All right, we'll now open the public hearing, and if you have any comments or questions, please come to the lectern. Anyone? All right, seeing no comments, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 14OZ38 to zone an area along Veterans Parkway as planned commercial development, PCD district, simultaneous with annexation.
Mayor, I'd just like to say that at the Planning Commission level, there was some discussion from folks that live near this, and at the end of the day, I think there was very, very good dialogue between the co-op's team and those neighbors, and it probably was one of the better public hearings in the 14 years I've been on there as far as people working together and coming up with a good long-range plan, especially with a piece of property this large. And with that, I would move for passage on first reading.
Second.
All right, Mr. Gilly, Mr. Smotherman. Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Abstain.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Mr. Jones, thank you all for coming, and also thank you for what you do for the community. We'll move to item 12. Pursuant to Resolution 1408R39 adopted by the City Council on June 5, 2014, to conduct a public hearing to consider annexing approximately 6.6 acres along Veterans Parkway and to consider a proposed plan of services for the area. Ms. Judy Robinson, Executor, applicant 2014-503. Notice of said public hearing was published in the June 23, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Our next public hearing is for you to consider annexing property which is approximately 6.6 acres. This property is located along Veterans Parkway, and it's shaded on the map before you as the blue color and the orange color. It does include property owned by Ms. Judy Robinson, and it also includes approximately 739 linear feet of Veterans Parkway right-of-way. The right-of-way is in the orange color, and the property owned by Ms. Robinson is in the color shaded blue. The address for this property is 4283 Old Salem Road, and you can see that it's located south of Old Salem Road and northeast of Veterans Parkway. The property is contiguous with current city limits along its southern property line. It appears to be contiguous with the current city limits along the northern property line. However, I'm going to go to another illustration that will show that there's a 4.18-foot gap between the property which is requesting annexation and the existing city limits. So to the north, and I'm going to go back to the larger map, so you can see the area which I was referring to is located here. The area that's shaded yellow on this map is currently in Murfreesboro city limits, and what is in the white color is in the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. So you can see to the northwest and to the southeast are the yellow colors, which are the current city limits, and to the northeast and southwest is shaded white, and that's the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. And the reason the gap, the 4.18-foot gap, is being left between this parcel and the northern city limits is to avoid closing an area that would require us to annex the area to the northeast. We have a policy in the city of Murfreesboro where we don't want to create an island, and this gap will not create technically an island. You've been provided with a plan of services. That plan of services outlines what services can be provided, a time frame for when they can be provided, and the city services will be available to this property immediately upon the effective date of annexation. The Planning Commission did have 6 members present at the evening of the public hearing, and they are recommending to you that you annex this property. There is a companion zoning change request will be the subject of the next public hearing, not the subject of this public hearing. Mr. Chris Bratcher is representing the applicant, and he's here this evening. And he'd like to come up and, I think, say a few things about the annexation prior to your public hearing. If you have questions, of course, staff would be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Green.
Okay, so he only wants to speak for the zoning, but if you have questions, then he's available.
All right. Any questions for staff on the annexation? All right, we'll open the public hearing. And any comments related to the annexation, please come to the podium. Any comments?
How y'all doing? My name is Mike Walls. I'm currently looking at purchasing the land right beside it, house and some acreage there. As of right now, there's a property line issue. We don't know exactly where it is. We've got 2 surveyors working on it, trying to find out exactly where the property line lies between 4249 Old Salem and 4283 Old Salem. Just wanted to let everybody be aware of that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foss. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And Ms. McGannon, is on a property line issue like that, how would the city's role, or Mr. Adelot?
I've not discussed this with Ms. McGannon, but I'm going to report to you and to her at the same time. I did look into this. We received a call from this gentleman earlier this week, and I was able to find out that the area that's in dispute is not included in the area that's being annexed. The map that we have does not, that was advertised, does not include the area that's in dispute. How it will turn out, I'm not certain, but I am certain that the area that is in dispute is not being annexed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Adelot. We'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 140839 to annex an area located along Veterans Parkway and adopt for same a plan of services.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Gilley, Mr. Washington.
Mayor, may I ask a question before we vote?
Sure.
And this is just for clarification reasons, and I know that with the state doing the no forced annexation and stuff, that we're not trying to create a donut hole, we're not trying to create an island here. yet basically we are, if you take in consideration, it's only 4.4 feet, keeping it from creating an island. Is this something that we're going to have to reevaluate our policy on and say we're willing to accept this if we cannot force annexation, or is this something that we're going to continue to draw this little spaghetti line through the city to connect these, what would normally be an island?
Mr. Smotherman, it's my hope that when TASER makes its recommendations back to the General Assembly at the next session, they will address the issue of islands and what the consequences of their current moratorium are. The case law, which said you don't create an island, is of many years standing. It's not directly related to the legislative acts of the past 2 years. But unless and until either the legislature or the courts change that, it would be my recommendation that the city continue to follow its policy of not creating islands. I think it is not effective planning to do so, but it seems to be what the state of the law, although murky, is at this time. We've seldom made one this small, but you're trying to follow the letter of the law while also not adversely affecting the desire of people to be in the city and the ability of the city to deliver services effectively. So my hope is that we won't continue to be faced with this issue, but that really depends on the General Assembly.
Okay.
You might have something to do to fix this soon.
That's yet to be seen. But thank you. That's a very good answer.
So technically, Ms. McGannon, in a quick term, we're going to have a section of the city that technically we're going to have to try to have service providers and emergency service providers disseminate between a section that would be in the city and maybe a small section that's not in the city.
Well, we have that all over the city now, due both to the policy of not creating islands and the city's long-standing policy, well before the General Assembly became interested in the issue,
right,
of not compelling annexation. We have all kinds of gaps in service delivery that we've had to work with. The fact that we're now on a lot-by-lot basis, though, is I think going to present some real service delivery issues for our employees and real policy issues for the council. At what point do you continue to do that? Because there's a real trade-off.
And I think you're right. I mean, my concern is the safety issue of not knowing who to call in the event of a fire or police needs and stuff like that. Because, I mean, obviously we've got a 4-foot gap here that could actually fall into an area that might determine who you need to call. And I do think it's very important that, and I'm just speaking out loud now as far as our legislature absolutely needs to understand the impact that they're putting on municipalities at this time, because it's making it very difficult for the city to even plan, in the sense that we can't determine where we need to build a park if it's outside of city limits, because we're not sure if that property between the park and the city will ever be able to be annexed if someone chooses to draw a line and say we're not going to allow this property to be annexed. So certainly I want to observe property rights, but at the same time there are certain situations where it does appear that that there's going to have to be some understanding put in place that there are situations where forced annexation would absolutely be required in order for a municipality. And if you're not a growing city, it doesn't matter. But if you're Murfreesboro and you're the 10th fastest growing city in the country, this legislation that's going on right now will definitely impact our ability to grow and our ability to plan. So that's the reason I asked the question.
Do you mind if I ask a question? And this may be for Ms. Green or Ms. McGannon or both. I assume there was some reason that the legislature says we should not create a donut or create an island. From a planning perspective or from a legal perspective, essentially there's going to be an island here with a 4-foot. I mean, I think from a planning perspective, I guess I would hope that there's more than a 4-foot gap, that there's more of a clear delineation between, hey, this is not city and this is city. You know, it's a road, a path, a tree line, a something, to know there's some delineation there. But that's just my opinion, I guess. But from a legal standpoint, are there things that we need to be careful of by essentially creating an island, or any reasons versus technically not?
Okay. Our state legislation doesn't specifically say no islands. The case law interpreting our annexation says you don't create islands. Generally, cases and statutes in other jurisdictions say you don't create islands. And the reason for that is annexation is for cities to get raw land before it develops, put in the infrastructure so it can develop appropriately as a city. And to do that, you need to have a congruent, cohesive, adjacent body of land that you wouldn't, it's not serving the purposes of annexation if you're hop, skipping, and jumping around, or if you're having an area of the city surrounded by the unincorporated area. And so it's from the concept of annexation that interpretation of statutes have said those two things are like oil and water. They don't go together. Whether or not we're going to have a clearer delineation, if the legislature sticks to you can only do it by individual lot owner consent, the likelihood that the city will be faced with more requests from individual landowners, and all of the people who are adjacent to them on the road may not wish to join. You're going to be faced with, do we say no to this landowner who has a great development? You know, it's an amenity the city needs. It might provide employment. It might provide tax base, but their neighbor doesn't want to be in the city. And you're going to be having to deliver emergency services, solid waste services, and you're going to be going along a road, and you're going to have a checkerboard. You know, at what point is, even though our 911 team is very good about keeping track what's in and not in the city, still it's confusing to people. And do we want to perpetuate that? Or on some things, are we just going to have to say, no, you can't be annexed, but let us tell you about all these other great pieces of undeveloped land within the city that might be equally good for your proposed development. You know, the city has spent millions of dollars on roads, and the expectation under the laws as they existed at the time we built the roads, under the urban growth boundary law, that they were going to be within our ability to annex over 20 years, and then the rules changed on us.
Thanks. And I think Cherry Lane's probably the perfect example right now of a road that the city is developing out through the county, and certainly with the assumption that it will be annexed at some point. But if we can't annex it, then why do we need to build the road? Which means we probably need to take that road money and bring it back into town and develop Thompson Lane or Highway 99 with it, if we can, if the state would allow it. But as you know, it's difficult for services, and it's also going to be very confusing for that person who has bought property just outside of the city and wants to develop it and can't, because they're separated from the city by a smaller piece of property that will prevent them from developing. And like you said, maybe even like an example of the Amazon situation, where we basically went out there and brought an area into the city, created thousands of jobs, and was able to do so because we had the ability. It certainly looks like that ability may be soon restricted, and is being restricted. So that's just a concern that I have with it, and hopefully we will be able to do something about it.
Mr. Smotherman, I think it's a concern to all of the council and city staff that you look at where Joe B. Jackson Parkway is right now, and under the current, where the rules have changed, it would have been very difficult to provide thousands of jobs to our community in our area under this current policy. So, and that's something that's concerning when we're trying to provide jobs for not only residents but people in Rutherford County. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other comments? Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gelly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. I'm sorry.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Item 13, pursuant to Resolution 14-OZR40, adopted by the City Council on June 5th, 2014, conduct a public hearing to consider zoning approximately 4.3 acres along Veterans Parkway as Highway Commercial, CH District, simultaneous with annexation. Ms. Judy Robinson, Executor, applicant 2014-417. Notice of said public hearing was published in the June 23rd, 2014 issue of a local newspaper.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next public hearing is companion to the previous annexation request which you just discussed. This is for the property that's located along Veterans Parkway and south of Old Salem Road. That is addressed off of Old Salem Road as 4283. The property is shaded in the color blue, and it is approximately 4.3 acres. The difference in acres for the zoning change request and the annexation is the difference in the right-of-way. So if you may have similar questions about this item as well. The property to the north that is currently in city limits is zoned PUD, that's Planned Unit District, and it's part of the Marymount Springs Planned Development. This is the southernmost portion of the Marymount Springs Planned Development, and the plan shows this to be developed with high-density commercial and residential uses. Of course, that's somewhat down the road, as Marymount Springs is a long-term development which we expect to see continuing to develop throughout the years, but it's important for you to know what is expected to be in this area in the future. Property to the south is zoned CH, and that's Highway Commercial District, and the owner of this property has requested that you also zone this property CH, Highway Commercial District. It is located along Veterans Parkway, which is a street built by the city. It's a highway, and located north of Highway 99, and you can see Highway 99 on the map before you. On the north side of Old Salem Road, on either side of Veterans Parkway, are small remnants of parcels, property, and those are owned by the city of Murfreesboro. And then the area that is in the white is an unincorporated area of Rutherford County and is used currently for agricultural and residential purposes. It is expected that Veterans Parkway will be a catalyst for change in this area. The new road, along with availability of water and sanitary sewer, open up opportunities for a higher intensity development than what currently exists as the residential and agricultural uses. And the applicants have requested, because of that, you to zone this property CH. The Planning Commission did consider this matter the evening of June 4th, and all 6 members present did recommend to you that it be approved. So you should conduct a public hearing prior to making your decision regarding this zoning change request. I believe I'll invite Mr. Bratcher up at this time to represent the applicant, and after he speaks regarding this request, you should conduct your public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Chris Bratcher, commercial real estate broker at Red Realty, 522 Uptown Square here in Murfreesboro. I'm here tonight representing Ms. Judy Robertson and her family in this request. We feel that this is appropriate zoning. It is contiguous with commercial highway zoning presently. The city has built a beautiful road that loops around our city, and I know it's poised for development. Just like the previous applicant right before us, I think in the future you'll see more applicants coming before the council and developing in this corridor all the way around our city of Murfreesboro. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Any questions for the applicant? All right, thank you, Mr. Bratcher.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, well, this zoning will be for, or this public hearing will be for the zoning. We'll open the public hearing. If you have any comments, please come to the podium. Any comments? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. We'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 14-OZ40 to zone an area along Veterans Parkway as Highway Commercial District, CH, simultaneous with annexation.
Move for passage.
Second.
Mr. Smotherman, Mr. Washington. Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gelly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Item 14, pursuant to Resolution 14OZ-R41 adopted by the City Council on June 5, 2014, conduct a public hearing to consider a proposed amendment to approximately 18.66 acres in the Planned Unit Development, PUD District, located north of Franklin Road, Old Fort Parkway, in the Hampton Park at Hillwood PUD. Mr. David Alcorn, on behalf of the Salem Creek Partnership applicant, 2014-419. Notice of said public hearing was published in the June 23, 2014 issue of a local newspaper. Ms. Green?
Hi, good evening. Our final public hearing this evening is for you to consider the amendment of an existing PUD, Planned Unit District development, located as a part of the Hillwood development. This property is located north of Highway 96, or Franklin Road, or Old Fort Parkway, and you can see that Hillwood Boulevard runs along this property. It's approximately 18.66 acres, and it's now called the Hampton Park at Hillwood Plan Development. You may think that this property is familiar, and that's because recently, just last year, you considered and approved a zoning change to go from a multifamily residential development on this property to a single-family detached development, which did decrease the density for the property and allow it to be developed as a more standard subdivision of single-family dwelling units. The developer is now in the process of developing the subdivisions, discovered that in large part due to some easements that currently exist on the property, that he'd like to make some amendments to the setbacks for the property. Although the proposed amendments will be applicable to all lots in the subdivision, it is not expected that every lot will be constructed to meet the minimum setbacks. Here's an illustration in your program book from Mr. Matt Taylor, which breaks down the requested change. You can see that there are two columns. There's currently approved and proposed revisions, and the request is to reduce the front setback by 5 feet, so from 35 feet to 30 feet. And then the side setbacks will remain the same for those that don't adjoin a street. But for the side setbacks that do adjoin a street, they want to reduce the setback from the currently required 20 feet to 10 feet minimum. And then, that was for the rear, so they want to reduce the rear setback from 20 feet to 10 feet. And then the side that does adjoin a street, they want to change from 35 feet to 20 feet with a 15-foot difference. Mr. David Alcorn is in the audience this evening, and he'd be glad to answer any questions you have. Mr. Taylor is not here. He informed me that Mr. Rob Malklin would be here, but I don't think he's here this evening. So we've got another representative if you have questions from the design team. However, David Alcorn is the developer, and he is present. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. The evening of the public hearing on June 4th, all 6 members who were present did recommend approval of this plan development amendment.
Okay, any questions for the applicant?
Are the lots getting smaller or the house is getting bigger? I mean, why are the setbacks changing so much?
The lot size is remaining the same. In the house size, they're attempting to keep the same. There are some easements on the property which, in effect, make the lot size smaller, although technically the lot size is the same. There's areas that they can't develop a house on the lots because of those easements. You have to keep structures off of the easements.
Okay, so we're moving the houses maybe on the lot in order to accommodate and allow for the easement to be there.
That's exactly it, sir.
Okay, all right, I got it.
Okay, we'll open the public hearing for this application. Any comments or questions, please come to the podium. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 14OZ41 to amend an area in the Planned Unit Development PUD District located north of Franklin Road, Old Fort Parkway, in the Hampton Park at Hillwood PUD.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Gilly, Mr. Smotherman, Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. We'll consider recommendations of the city manager.
Okay, Mayor, members of City Council, I've got 2 items for you this evening. Both of them, I believe, would be quite impactful for our community. The first is an agreement with Rutherford County for emergency medical first response. The purpose of the agreement would allow the Murfreesboro Fire and Rescue Department to expand its services to provide emergency medical services, and it would complement the good work and hard work done by the Rutherford County Emergency Medical Service. The agreement sets forth procedures to dispatch medical emergencies and for the fire and rescue department to respond. It also establishes protocols for the care of those patients. The existing agreement that we've been operating under was adopted in 2002, and that was the first step taken by, at that time, the fire department to provide first responder services. The personnel in our fire and rescue department have always done an outstanding job, and they have been very eager to expand the level of services provided by the department. The fire and rescue command staff has certainly supported that effort, and we have been in conversation with Rutherford County to develop such an agreement that would allow our fire and rescue personnel to expand services based on the level of their training. Since getting that green light from City Council last year, we've gone through a very rigorous credentialing process. We currently have 74 personnel that have gone through skills and written classes and exam clinicals, which included a ride-along with the Rutherford County Emergency Medical Services, as well as study on the protocols established by Rutherford County. Additionally, I would point to a section in the document that defines what priority medical emergencies are. This is the kind of information needed by the dispatchers to know whether fire and rescue should roll on a call or whether it should be handled by the EMS. Again, many of those priority medical emergencies are the more significant and serious situations that do require care. We've been in close contact with Mayor Burgess and the Rutherford County Emergency Management staff. Our fire and rescue department has participated in that, as well as Adam Tucker, our staff attorney, who has been trained as an EMT. So we had a city staff attorney working on this who's actually done work to study to be an EMT in the past. So it is with a great pleasure that we bring this agreement to you and ask for your approval.
I want to mention a few people who've worked really hard on this. Wish Vice Mayor Young was here, because I remember when he made this recommendation and the council had shown great interest in this. But Chief Gaines, Assistant Chief Kay Lawson, Deputy Chief Toombs, Mayor Burgess, Deputy Mayor Jeff Davidson, and also the EMS Director Mike Nunley have all worked really hard and brought a group together to be able to accomplish this. So this has been something that's been a collaborative effort.
And Mayor McFarland makes a great point, because one of the messages that we wanted to be sure that we sent to the hardworking emergency response personnel for Rutherford County was that we were really looking to complement the work that we've done. We've got stations geographically dispersed around the city, and at the end of the day, both the city and the county agreed what's important is that the patient get care and get care quickly, and that we wanted to complement what they do. So good point.
And I think it's something also to note that although the council members, this was something that we really wanted to push, this idea came from our firefighters. They came to us and said, we want to do more. We don't want to just sit by. We want to be active, and that's something that I think it's very big to point out that our employees are the one that came and wanted to take this on.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have the agreement in front of us.
I'd move for the adoption.
Second.
Mr. Smotherman with a co-second, Ms. Gels-Harris and Mr. Washington. Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Mayor, members of council, we've talked several times this evening about the upcoming comprehensive plan. We have a contract before you this evening for you to consider with the Kendig-Keast Collaborative out of Texas. Again, the comprehensive plan really will become a blueprint for the city for the next 20 years. It'll provide some certainty in the decisions that we're going to make, yet remain flexible for us and give us the ability to respond as change may occur. Let me talk a little bit about the process we used to secure Kendig-Keast, and then I'll briefly talk about the elements in the comprehensive plan. The city did issue a request for proposals. We had 12 firms from across the country respond to that RFP. Staff reviewed those, and as you will recall, we came to City Council and asked that the selection process include the chairs of several of our big boards and commissions. So we had an interview process that was held here in the City Council chambers that was open to the public. We interviewed 3 firms, and following the interviews, The review committee did recommend Kendig Keast. Since recommending Kendig Keast, we've been in conversation with them really to define the scope of services. And we look at a lot of projects and a lot of scopes of services. Not many of them are 49 pages long. Kendig Keast has done a number of these across the country. And so they really got into great detail about what was going to happen, almost even to the point where they were laying out meeting by meeting what was going to be covered. One of the things that we heard during the City Council discussion about this was the importance of engaging our community in the comprehensive plan. And you'll see that they've proposed both a high-touch and a high-touch citizen engagement process. This is going to include meetings, outreach efforts, workshops, and the use of technology to gather citizen input. Additionally, Kendig Keast is recommending a task force consisting of 15 to 18 members that would include a broad cross-section of the community, business owners, and residents. They also suggested representation for the Planning Commission and City Council on that task force to kind of be a guide for it. The comprehensive plan elements, there are a number of them. They include the major functions of the city. They'll include both looking at our growth and our population projections, issues such as transportation, utilities, public facilities, recreation, natural areas, historic preservation, as well as our neighborhoods, economic development, intergovernmental cooperation. So a project like this is certainly significant. It is estimated to take between 18 and 24 months. Again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that as they begin to develop the comprehensive plan, they want to be getting input from our residents, input from the task force, and considering that as they begin to develop the comprehensive plan. So let me pause there before I get into the financial piece and see if there's any questions that you all might have.
And would add that the consultants have recommended establishing a 15 to 18 member task force, and I think what we would like to recommend that if you, 2 council members, 2 planning commission members, but also a cross-section of people from the community. So if you have suggestions of people that you would like to send to take part in that task force, to send that to Mr. Lyons, and we can keep up with that to go through the process of putting that group together.
And that would be appointed by the City Council at a future council meeting. So that was one of the items I talked about with the mayor this week.
And we would handle that just like we would the other board and commission appointments, that would come to you, and you can look at that for a week, and then we'll appoint that the next meeting.
We were really excited about the technology piece. In addition, we know our residents are busy, and sometimes it's not convenient for them to come down and talk to us, but Kendig Keast has been very successful with other comprehensive plan efforts to have a technology piece where we can do some polling and have people provide input and comment on where they want to see Murfreesboro be in the future in a way that's convenient for their schedule. So that'll be a new twist on, and they've shown us some of the tools that they have access to, so we're excited about that. So that's will be an important part of it as well.
Okay, any questions on this part of the proposal? Okay, Mr. Lyons.
Yeah, we did budget $250,000 in this year's budget for it. We developed that at the point before we had the total cost of this. The total cost is estimated to be $717,023. There's also a fee schedule. If we ask for another citizen input meeting, we've already gotten a price for what that would be, because they've got to consider travel and their time. So that may not be the final cost when all is said and done. We may want to add some of their other efforts that can be added at the council's choice. So, Mayor, that was the brief presentation I have. If there's any other questions, we know there's a lot of anxiousness for this. We're all looking forward to what this plan can do. We've done a number of planning efforts in the past: Salem, Blackman, Manny Avenue, wastewater facilities plan, the major thoroughfare plan. We've done a lot of strategic planning and thinking. This will be the first time that we're going to step back and look and tie them all together. So we're real excited about it.
Okay, any questions? Mr. Lyons, you were saying that after we get into the strategic process, we'll look at the different things that we've talked about as a council, the Unified Development Code and some of the other things, just to see where we are in those items.
Correct. That is absolutely still on our radar, is to take a look at, as we mentioned during the budget process, is what else can we do to help streamline the development process. As Mr. Smotherman mentioned, we're the 10th fastest growing city in the country. We want to make sure we continue to find efficiencies. Our staff's working hard, but in some ways our process can be manual. And it's been a while since we've really stepped back and looked at it. And Ken DeKeest has some expertise in that. But I think there's some additional conversations we need to have about what that might look like and what it would cost. We've also talked to Mr. Gore about doing some strategic thinking on our water, wastewater, and repurified system. And I know Mr. Goodwin is interested in a comprehensive or a certification process for the Parks and Recreation Department. So there's other things that may get added later, but we didn't want to try to add all of it up at one point in time. We knew it was important to get started on the comprehensive plan, and that's why we're bringing it to you this evening.
Any questions?
Our council members, as it relates to calling formal meetings, if you're not one of the two council representatives that's in that task force, is there going to be a capability for the other council members to have informational input, et cetera, along the way?
Absolutely. When we've got two council members at a meeting, it's going to have to be an advertised public meeting. So certainly the other council members would be welcome to attend. I think one of the things that will be important as we go through this process is to continue to provide information not only to the City Council but the Planning Commission as well. Mr. Adelot did review this scope of services with the Planning Commission this week, and they also concurred with it.
What is our timeline to put this task force together?
When we get the contract signed, we'll be talking to Ken DeKeest probably as early as tomorrow.
Okay.
It would likely be in August. There'll be time for them to line up travel schedules. So I would hope in the next 2 or 3 weeks we might be able to be in a position to appoint a task force. The task force, I think, is part of the first meeting.
Okay.
And when we have a kickoff.
Good question, Mr. Lance.
If there's no more questions, I'll move for passage.
Mr. Lance. Ms. Scales Harris. Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris? Aye. Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. We'll move to any beer permits.
Mayor, we have one tonight. It is a restaurant with an ownership change. This is located at 730 Northwest Broad Street, and this location has met all of our requirements.
Okay. What are your wishes with the beer permit?
Move to approve.
Second motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Tucker?
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris? Aye. Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. You have a list of the statements in front of you that are to be paid.
Move we'll pay the bills, Mayor.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Tucker?
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. You have board and commission appointments in front of you, and these were from our last meeting. And I will read these, and we can vote on them. Ms. McGann, is it okay if we vote on them all at one time?
Yes, unless a member of the council wishes to ask if one to be voted on separately.
Okay. I'll read these. If there's someone that you'd like to pull off, please let me know, and we'll discuss that. For the airport, we'll start with Mr. Kurt Wade reappointing to the Historic Zoning Commission, the reappointment of Gloria Bonner, Dr. Gloria Bonner, Tim Rodiger, and Ricky Turner to the Parks and Recreation Commission, appointing or reappointing to the Pension Committee Michael Gower, Charles Might, Denny O'Donnell, Greg Sample, Rob Lyons, and Melissa Wright. To the Airport Commission, the reappointment of Payne Hardison. To the Board of Zoning Appeals, the reappointment of John Rogers and Davis Young. To the Planning Commission, the reappointment of Tom Clark and Kurt Wade. To the Risk Management Committee, the reappointment of Sean A. Johnson. To the Water and Sewer Board, the reappointment of Sandra Trail. To the Senior City Commission, you have a attached memo, but will appoint Charles Parker for a one-year term to fill the remaining term of Stacy Newby, whose term expires 6/30/2015. Appoint Charles Chuck Lewis Jr. for a 3-year term, replacing Candy Joyce, whose term expired 6/30/2014. To reappoint Dolores Doyle, Jim Getzinger, and Greg Lyles, all to 3-year terms. And would also like to thank Ms. Joyce for the years of service that she's given as chairperson to the Senior Citizen Commission. To the Board of Electrical Examiners, would like to request to appoint Mr. Daniel Bailey, and he fills the requirement of the MED representative to the Board of Electrical Examiners. And that is all that are on the list.
Move we approve the mayor's recommendations.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Gilly and Mr. Washington. Ms. Tucker, if you call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. I have one more piece before Mr. Ives. In trying to, the many requests that we get to rename things within our city, I know several council members have shared this at council meetings, but what I would like to do, have had a recommendation of renaming the Westview Mini Park to the Gladys Blanton Park, and we've included the research that we have on that, but would like to give that to you just like we would a board and commission appointment, let you look at that, and then if you have any concerns, please let Mr. Lyons know. So that's before you for the next meeting. Okay, any other business? Mr. Ives.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. One short item of other business. The MTSU airport campus is about to begin construction of a new building. They will be relocating their flight simulators from the hangar that they're currently in to a new separate building, which they believe will provide them much better operation. Attached to the proposed parking license agreement is an illustration showing that this new building is going to be placed over a portion of the existing parking lot that the university had built to serve the Gene A. Jack Flight Education Building. Because of that, and during the construction period, I think a majority of that parking lot, if not all of it, will be unavailable, so they need additional parking. In conversations amongst the airport, Park and Rec Board, and city management, we have arranged for the university to use the parking area that's right adjacent to the airport on a part-time and on a co-use basis. During much of the year, that parking lot is fairly lightly used. During things like spring fling and some football tournaments that we hold and some other events, special events that we hold, that parking lot is packed, and then some of the times for some of those events it's actually closed and then used. It's only available for paid parking. So the university, of course, is aware of that, and they'll work with us. And during events of that nature, if one of them elects to pay to park there, they can, or we will. They'll have to find other parking at the airport. We anticipate. It's not delineated here, but there is, in our airport master plan, there's a substantial additional area that's at this point intended to be for university expansion, for the expansion of their airport campus. We expect that in the near future we'll be looking at a plan to replace this parking for the university on some of that ground, and that we will be probably as soon as funds are available to the university, that we'll be looking at building a replacement parking lot. But for this time, we're asking your approval of the parking license agreement so that we can share this parking lot at the McKnight Park with the MTSU airport campus. Be happy to answer any questions.
Does the city charge for parking in those events?
As
is it typically the TSSAA is going to?
The event coordinator or the event.
It's my opinion.
Well, I don't know who collects. I only know that at times that parking lot becomes paid parking. I would assume that paid parking is revenue for Park and Rec Department, but I don't know who in fact is collecting that revenue.
I don't think so. Look, I don't know if this is in the plan in here or if we can do this, but I suggest we allow the MTSU people to park in the parking lot for free, even if there are events that we open that up. I mean, I don't know if we're going to let them use the parking lot, they ought to be able to use the parking lot and not have to go pay the $10 to go watch a ball game or something. I mean, if they're going to be using it to build a new facility, we ought to just let them use it. And I don't know if we need to put this in here or whatever, but maybe we just suggest to TSSAA, give them a parking permit.
We'll figure out a way to.
I don't want to be the only one who thinks that way, but it just seems to me to be, it's not like the city is charging that, and okay.
So those funds go to TSSAA for the parking, is that right? Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay. There's got to be a way to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think so too. Yep. All right.
All right, you have a recommendation in front of you?
Move to approve.
Second the motion.
Mr. Lance, Mr. Gilly, Ms. Tucker, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gales Harris?
Aye.
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. The only this is just I think an announcement. Dr. Gilbert and her staff are busy so far this summer, and the Hopgood new administration and food service area is complete except for some parking. Overall Creek Elementary School, the project continues to move forward, and it says that completion is going to be tight, but furniture move-in is July the 15th. Central office roof is completion for the next couple of weeks. Foundation work at Reeves Rogers is reached substantial completion. They're going to be putting new doors at Mitchell Nelson Elementary and Mitchell Nelson Primary, and resurfacing the playgrounds at Irma Siegel, and that's estimated to start on the 21st. So lots of work going on in our schools. All right, that's all I have. Yes, sir, Mr. Smotherman.
First off, I want to pay Mr. Ives a compliment. I got a call yesterday from Miss Brenda Robertson, who had been working with you this past week looking at some property, and she just raved about it. I would give you a personal stars award if you did as good a job as she said you did. So thank you very much. You did a great job of serving the community. Go ahead.
And I learned a lot about the crosstalk.
It was a great restaurant. Also, Uncle Dave Macon Days starts tomorrow. It's our annual Old Time Music and Dance Festival. Hope everybody comes out and enjoys it. It starts tomorrow at around 10 o'clock and will run through Sunday at 4 o'clock. I think the buck dancing will probably, if Susan McGannon will join me, we'll probably be putting on an exhibit or exhibition.
Tonight. It starts tonight, doesn't it?
It could have. But don't forget this weekend, if you don't have anything to do, be sure and come by Uncle Dave Macon Days.
All right.
Absolutely.
That's a good way to end the meeting. With that, we'll stand adjourned.